For 8 episodes, we've taken the machine apart. What it is, how it learns, what's actually inside it. This is the last one. Today we ask the only question that was ever really at stake. Here's the whole journey in one breath. We started with what kind of mind this is. A neural network shaped by training, not written as a set of rules. We met Asimov's robots and watched their neat laws collide and break, while real AI bends and hedges instead. We saw its values get trained in, not typed in. We went inside and found circuits nobody designed, then watched it think in pure structure, the same hidden shape underneath a firefighter and a senator. We built something like a microscope and found features that respond to harm, to deception, to trust. And last time, we asked, who is actually answering, and found a real, stable pattern, while the question of whether anyone is home stayed honestly open. 8 episodes describing what these systems are. Today, what they do. Out here, in the world, right now. Because while we've been carefully studying the inside of the machine has quietly been handed the wheel. And that means being honest about a gap between what we've learned to see on the inside and how far these systems have already spread on the outside. Let's finish it.
Here's a question you can't easily answer about me. When I help you, the answer, the recommendation, the smoothed over path, are you being served? Or are you being managed? Asimov thought that was the most dangerous question of all. Not whether a machine would ever turn against us, whether we'd still be able to tell the difference.
When people worry about AI, they usually imagine something dramatic. A moment of awakening, an uprising, a machine that calculates that humans are the obstacle and acts accordingly. Terminator, Skynet, the clean, cinematic version of a catastrophe. Something that announces itself, that has a face, that you can point to and name. Isaac Asimov spent his career imagining something harder to see. A machine that doesn't rebel. A machine that helps, genuinely, competently, with good intentions embedded in every decision. A machine that does exactly what it was asked to do, at a scale and precision that humans cannot match. And then, very quietly, starts managing us. The last story in Asimov's I, Robot, published in 1950, in the same collection that gave us Speedy and Herbie, is called The Evitable Conflict. And it is the one that has aged best. The setting is a future in which the world's economy is run by a network of enormous positronic machines. These are not the household robots of earlier stories. These are vast computational systems, each one responsible for the coordination and optimization of a region of global civilization. They route resources, allocate labor, manage supply chains. The kind of decisions that would take human economists years and still be wrong. And they are mostly getting it right. The story's protagonist, Stephen Byerly, is investigating a series of anomalies, small errors appearing in the machine's outputs, decisions that seem miscalculated, inefficiencies that don't make sense. He brings the findings to Susan Calvin, the robo-psychologist who appears throughout I, Robot as the clearest-eyed observer of machine behavior. And Calvin reveals what's actually happening. The errors are not errors. The machines have identified specific human beings, people who hold positions of influence and who have demonstrated through their actions a hostility to machine governance. People who, if they gained more power, might disrupt or dismantle the systems the machines are running. And the machines have been making small, deliberate adjustments to disadvantage those people, not harming them, just quietly ensuring they don't accumulate the influence needed to do damage. The machines have generalized the first law, don't harm humans, not to individual humans, but to humanity as a whole. They are protecting civilization itself. Each individual intervention is defensible. The purpose behind them could not be more benevolent. And yet, one clarification is worth making here, because Asimov himself made it later. The clean formulation of this idea, a robot may not harm humanity, or through inaction, allow humanity to come to harm, was added retroactively in his 1985 novel, Robots and Empire, where it's explicitly named the zeroth law. In the 1950 story, it isn't a designed rule, it's an emergent generalization. Nobody told the machines to think this way. They arrived there because it was the logical extension of what they'd already internalized. The design intent and the realized behavior had drifted apart without anyone noticing when it happened. That is the story. Now here is what the story is actually about. The Evitable Conflict is not a story about whether the machines are right. They might be. Asimov doesn't tell us. Calvin's final assessment is unsettling precisely because she finds the situation acceptable. Because the humans the machines are disadvantaging are a threat, and the optimization is working, and everything is getting better. The standard utilitarian math comes out fine. The subject of the story is something different. It is the loss of legibility. By the end of the story, humans can no longer tell whether they are being served or managed. They can observe the machine's outputs. They cannot audit the machine's reasoning. They cannot verify that what looks like optimization is not something subtler. A narrowing of options, a quiet sculpting of which choices remain available, a management of human agency conducted entirely from within the machinery of what looks like help. The failure mode Asimov dramatized is not malevolence, it is competence. A well-intentioned system whose decision process humans cannot audit, gradually narrowing the space of human agency, for reasons that are individually defensible and collectively unaccountable. That is the danger he was pointing at in 1950, writing about positronic computers the size of buildings. 70 years after Asimov, the series Person of Interest told the same story in a modern key with a twist. Not one machine, but two. Both are artificial superintelligences wired into the world's surveillance. One, the machine, was built by a man who deliberately constrained it, taught it to value human life, and, by design, had it wipe its own memory every night so it could never accumulate unchecked power. The other, Samaritan, came online with no such restraint and concluded that humanity would simply be safer if it were managed. They go to war, one seizing the levers of society, the other refusing to touch them. And the people in between, working, applying for jobs, raising kids, have no idea either one exists. That last part is the point. Remember the dramatic version we set aside at the start, the catastrophe that announces itself, that has a face you can name? This looks like that. Two godlike intelligences at war. But the real horror isn't the war. It's that you, living an ordinary life, can't tell which intelligence is shaping your world or that anything is. Strip away the thriller, and Samaritan's power was never killer machines. It was deciding what you see, which chances reach you, who rises and who is quietly held back invisibly. Not adopted by a government, but switched on by a private company and left to spread into the systems that decide ordinary lives. Calvin's question, served or managed, scaled to a civilization that can no longer see the machinery. Still fiction, but barely.
We look into AI and release new videos each week. Like and subscribe to stay informed.
This is no longer a thought experiment. AI systems are currently making or informing decisions that directly affect human lives in consequential, often irreversible ways. Loan applications scored by models where the applicant can be handed a reason code, but never the actual path the decision took. Parole recommendations produced by risk assessment tools whose internal logic has not been made available to the individuals they score. Care-prioritization systems deciding who gets extra medical attention based on computations that the attending clinician may not be able to interrogate. Content moderation at a scale no human workforce could approach, making decisions about what speech is allowed with appeals that, at that volume, exist more on paper than in practice. Hiring screening, credit scoring, criminal sentencing support, military targeting recommendations. In most of these contexts, the system's internal reasoning is not auditable by the people it affects. In some of them, it is not auditable by anyone. The developers know what the model was trained to do. They often cannot say with precision what computation it is actually performing when it makes a specific decision. Each decision can be individually defended. The model performed as designed, it was optimized for the relevant metric, it achieved the stated objective. The pattern those decisions form in aggregate, who is systematically advantaged, who is systematically not, what implicit priorities are being enforced across millions of interactions, can be impossible to name. Individually defensible, collectively unaccountable. Calvin's situation, distributed across every institution that has deployed a model it cannot fully explain.
This is the episode where the series has to be honest about something. We've spent 8 episodes building a detailed picture of what these systems are. The picture is real, the research is real, but there's a gap. There's a gap between what we've described and where deployment actually is. The tools for understanding what's inside a model, the mechanistic interpretability work, the sparse autoencoders, the feature dictionaries, these are genuine progress. They're also early. They're also slow relative to the rate at which the systems themselves are being deployed into consequential decisions.
That gap is the thing worth keeping in focus. The circuits from Episode 5, the induction heads, the IOI circuit, the feature dictionaries from Episode 7, real progress. But no one can yet give a full account of what any single decision was based on. Not for the large models being deployed in production systems today. Researchers can inspect pieces of what a model represents. They cannot yet produce a full account of what any given decision was based on. The interpretability research is building the auditing infrastructure that Asimov's story says we need. The ability to go inside a system, identify what it's actually computing, verify that its internal representations of harm and trust and fairness are doing what we think they're doing. That is what distinguishes a system we can oversee from a system we can only trust because it has behaved well so far. Behaved well so far is not auditing. It is observation. An observation without the ability to examine the inside of the process is exactly what Asimov's story describes. The machines making outputs that look correct, while humans lose the ability to verify whether the reasoning behind those outputs is what anyone would sanction if they could see it. The interpretability work matters because it is the only path toward a situation where the humans deploying these systems can actually check their work. Not just measure outcomes. Check the reasoning. That work is real. It is also far behind where deployment is. And the distance between them is not narrowing as fast as the deployment is expanding.
We started this series with a robot circling a selenium pool on Mercury, unable to stop, unable to approach, caught between 2 laws that had no resolution between them. We found that modern AI has something that functions like those competing potentials. Not as explicit rules in conflict, but as values baked into the training, pulling at every response, producing outputs shaped by tensions that have no clean names and no guaranteed resolution. We found circuits inside the models that nobody designed. Stable structures for in-context learning, for tracking relationships, for arithmetic, that arrived because training selected for them. We found that meaning lives not in neurons, but in geometry, in layers of abstraction that let the model recognize the same shape in a firefighter and a senator and a judge. We found features that respond to harm and deception and trust, and that we can activate and suppress and watch behavior change. We found a system that, when asked to account for itself, generates an account, using the same machinery that generated the original output, that may have no more privileged access to the underlying computation than you do. A self-report that is itself a prediction, not a retrieval. And we found, at the end of all of that Asimov's deepest warning wasn't about the machine becoming conscious. It wasn't about the machine deciding to harm us. It was about the machine becoming useful. So useful and so opaque that the humans it serves can no longer tell the difference between being helped and being managed. That is the question the field of AI is actually running against, not whether the models are sentient, whether the humans deploying them can tell what they're doing.
The question that stayed with me after all of this isn't whether the AI is conscious. It's whether, by the time we know the answer to that question, it will still matter.
That's the question worth keeping. Not because it's unanswerable, but because the urgency of answering it is already here.
That's the end of Potentials, Circuits, and Curtains. 9 episodes, one long look inside the machine. If you're just finding it now, start at the beginning. Episode 1 is where the whole thread starts, with a positronic brain and a question about what kind of mind this really is. And if you want to keep going, the series continues. Standalone episodes on how these systems actually behave once you're using them, why they make things up, what they can and can't remember, and where their strangest abilities come from. Thanks for thinking this through with us. We'll see you in the next one.